Between 1850 and World War I, about 350,000 people left Finland, 95% of them heading for the United States. One of them was my great-grandfather, Eelu Kiviranta. Eelu was an unusual man. From the time he was a little child, he had rhymes running around in his head, according to autobiographical poetry, which has been preserved and translated from the Finnish by his granddaughter, Lillian Lehto. Eelu was born in Oulainen, in the province of Oulunlani, in 1873 to Johan and Maria Kiviranta. He never had formal schooling but was taught at home to read when he was 7 years old. At age 15, he taught himself to write. He had beautiful penmanship. He started to write down his poetry and eventually submitted much of it to the Finnish Literature Society in Helsinki in the years 1896 through 1898. 96 of his poems have recently been located in their archives. When he arrived in the U.S., he continued to write. In one of his early poems written in this country, he described his childhood.
I was born at such a significant time when the bells of the New Year started to chime. On the last day of December, it was indeed a moment to remember. I entered this earthly abode to spend a brief childhood on this road. So I developed day after day and acquired strength enough to play. I grew stronger every day. When called to meals, I didn't delay. I gobbled up cereal and gruel, and at chores didn't play the fool. Having spent my time in porridge land, I got to be quite a hefty lad. I began to explore the broader world. Thoughts of girls in my head often swirled. We held hands and of hugs got a few, or other pleasures in the village would pursue. I got to be quite a chunk of a boy, and already began with rhymed words to toy.
Eelu spent 3 years in the army, from about 1895 to 1898. He wrote about this in his poem, Eelu's Early Days.
I still remember those early years in Finland. They're crystal clear. 6 of those years in Oulu were spent, where to be a soldier I was sent. That was often miserable and more, having to learn the discipline of war. We had to turn briskly again and again to directions that were given in Russian.
Finland was a Grand Duchy of Russia at the time, and the officers were Russian. He also wrote about his army experience in a poem called A Greeting to a New Recruit.
Here comes a new recruit, a young greenhorn so tender, to Oulu, here to learn manly ways in this concern, into a soldier to evolve, to guard our country with resolve. Here you will shortly learn war affairs to ponder, in your mind them to rehearse as these walks you traverse.
Eelu then goes on to describe the training of a soldier in the Finnish army, learning to handle a gun, to keep his uniform neat, learning to march, and to take orders. He describes his feelings.
Existence here is miserable, during this time exceptional. Your strength will be tested harshly. Shouting you'll hear daily.
But, he concludes,
when you have learned these lessons well, how to be a proper soldier, when your time of service ends, when you receive your discharge, you will be a soldier of whom your country can be proud, one who will serve faithfully and defend the fatherland eagerly.
After he was discharged from the army, Eelu found work in the Ostrom leather goods factory, where he spent 3 years. He writes about it in Eelu's Early Days.
Then to the Ostrom factory I came, where the best years of my life were spent. And in the wide world I became content. In the factory we made goods of leather and had fun with the girls in all kinds of weather. I composed some excellent songs about them, but the girls considered this a problem. They got so angry at me, everyone, although it was just all loving fun.
Later on, he continues.
I was still young and unmarried. In the evening with the girls I tarried. At this I was the very best, and I didn't have just one conquest. I was always a happy guy. Of sweethearts I had a good supply. There was Greta and Lisa and also Hilda, and there may have been one named Tilda. I kept no track of the money I spent. In the girls' company I was content.
One of the girls Eelu met was Kaisa Vegabera from Haugiburas near Oulu. Eelu was through fooling around with girls when he fell in love with Kaisa.
For a while I enjoyed this fun on the town, until finally I met my very own. Together our solemn vows we made, the paths of life to walk side by side. My life was entirely different with her. I no longer longed for any other. With my own Geisa I was content. It was for me that she was meant. No longer in this life was I alone. A sweetheart I have had of my very own. I knew I belonged by this girl's side. I did my work for my beautiful bride. No longer was my money foolishly spent. It was needed now for rooms to rent.
Eelu and Geisa were married on April 4th, 1900. They had a son, Vaino, born on January 13th, 1901. Economic conditions in Finland at the time were deplorable. Finland could not adequately feed her people. The young couple decided they would emigrate to America, where living conditions would certainly be better. Eelu left first, leaving behind his wife with their baby, who was too young to travel. They would join him later. Eelu headed for Hungo, the port of embarkation where hundreds were awaiting passage. He wrote about his trip in a poem entitled Trip to America.
Exasperated with wretched conditions in Finland, I left to search for El Dorado. Across Finland by train we flew until Hungoniemi came into view. There was all manner of humankind, each one with America on his mind. We went to the office of immigration, where the agent directed our migration. Each of us received a ticket, then they took us to the ship with it. A large group of us looked out to shore and gazed at those we'd see no more.
On March 16, 1901, Eelu boarded the Polaris, which took him to Hull, England.
The ship was not very clean, and food preparation lacked hygiene. The food was not appetizing enough. We had to eat like pigs from a trough. The lack of water in the washroom cast o'er our spirits doom and gloom. When we went to complain about this, swear words at that they would hiss. This happened also at meal times. Sadly, they treated us very badly.
After 4 rather miserable days, they arrived in Hull. From there, they were whisked by train to Liverpool.
Having arrived in Hull, we received a treat of our favorite buns made of wheat, which a cup of coffee did wash down. Then onto the railroad station in town we were whisked, and onto a train. The 2-hour trip wasn't much of a strain. Liverpool was our next destination, and when we arrived at that station, again we were given some coffee and bread, and to the next ship we were led.
In Liverpool, they boarded an Allen Line ship. That phase of their trip was much more pleasant.
The ship was beautiful and fine, a large ship of the Allen Line. We toted our bags on board, so bold. There was plenty of room for us in the hold. Hundreds of people were now on board, people who'd come from all over the world. Soon we were on the Atlantic so bright, and Liverpool disappeared from sight. The ship seemed to skim the surface as the waves seemed to lick its face. Now the trip became very pleasant, for nothing was lacking in the present. Now ever so thankful we could be that food there was, and it was plenty.
Excitement built up as they neared the New World.
We have now been here for over a week, and every eye wants to see firsthand on the horizon a glimpse of land. Finally, we reached the shore. This is America, we're at sea no more. From here, our trip continued on by train. It went on and on. We changed trains several times during those 3 days and night times. The train traveled at great speed. Into the interior it did proceed, as trees whizzed by and an occasional mountain. The long trip I had survived, and finally in Hancock I arrived.
Eelu found work in one of the mines. He talks about his experience in A Trammer's Story.
When to this El Dorado I came, immediately I went to work at this game. They placed a burning lamp on my forehead, and toward mine work I next was led. All kinds of thoughts into my mind did creep, as we were lowered into the deep. Everywhere was pitch-black darkness. Against one's mind it seemed to press. When I scrambled out of the skip, a discomfort seemed my head to whip. To grab the car, I had to bend. I almost thought this was the end. I had started to work in the copper mine, to wrestle with rocks I could not decline. I tried to find strength from somewhere. This trammer's work was hard to bear.
Eelu was a small man, not much over 5 feet tall, and one can imagine the effort this work required of him.
This was work for a mule or maybe an ox, to be constantly filling the car with rocks. Then pushing the car was a real pain. There were other tortures, let me explain. When the car would jump off the track, we had to try to get it back. It took all one's strength, that mess, to fix. We had to resort to all kinds of tricks.
Finally, Eelu had had enough of mine work underground.
A trammer's work is hard to bear. To it nothing else can compare. In that work I did not belong, and I didn't do it for very long. I was there 5 months spare, then left to look for work elsewhere.
When Eelu arrived in Hancock, he settled to live in Ripley, a nearby village. His wife Geisa and baby Vaino joined him there. While they were in Ripley, Vaino died and a son Laurie was born. Sometime after Eelu left his job in the mine, he found work in Red Ridge, west of there, on the shore of Lake Superior. Eelu got a job at a stamp mill. This suited him much better. He worked feeding rocks containing copper ore into a crusher, which separated the ore from waste material by a pounding process. During all this time, Eelu had been composing poetry, but so far it was preserved only in his head or in a handwritten private collection. About this time, he purchased a table model printing press and supplemented his income by publishing and selling his poetry. This printing press was called a nirkkipaino, or fist press, because the whole operation was done by hand. It's hard to imagine how difficult this printing process was. Each letter had to be set by hand into a tray backwards. The mirror image of the page was then inked with the pages printed one at a time, one side at a time. Eelu himself assembled and bound each book by hand. The result was small books about 4 by 6 inches, priced at 10 to 15 cents each. It was time-consuming work for a man who already had a full-time job, but this was typical. Eelu was a hard worker all his life and could not tolerate laziness. Eelu wrote about his avocation in a poem entitled A Rascal's Craft, for he often referred to himself as a rascal.
You may know that Kiviranta, the one who sells poems, that one. He equipped himself with a printing press and now darkens paper with finesse. Success as a wordsmith he might not have had he not been a little mad. But brains he has where he can gather words which he can weave together and spin events in such a fashion that they become a clever poem. His behavior is sometimes rather loutish. He often offends those with feelings squeamish. When he writes about this event or that one, some don't understand it's all in fun. About Eelu, everyone should know some pranks from his pens do flow. In a physical contest he can be beaten, but in a war of words he remains undefeated.
We do not know how many of the books he printed or sold, but we do know that many people in the Keweenaw during his life knew of Elu's poetry. When he could, he traveled selling them, in the winter on skis and in the summer on a bicycle. Within 6 years after arriving in this country, the Kivirantas had saved enough money to buy a farm. They moved to Nisula in 1907, where they had purchased 80 acres. Here, their third child, Ida, was born in 1909. A second child, Hilda, had been born in Red Ridge. Eelu had realized the immigrant's dream. Naturally, he had to weave a poem about his experience. In a poem he entitled A Farmer's Freedom and Work.
The one in America who chooses farming will find the experience gratifying and charming. This freedom cannot to anything compare. A whistle he'll hear in his ears nevermore. His footsteps are free as he wanders the land. For his livelihood he has chosen farmland. Here he can eat the fruits of his work. Life is pleasant, he has no desire to shirk. He orders his own coming and going. Bosses aren't commanding and hovering. He has no aversion to his toil. At no time does he feel like a slave. As his own boss, he is always brave. No longer a whistle issues commands. He only is the boss of his lands. And no one leads him by the nose. He is happy with the life he chose.
His farm chores did not keep Eelu from keeping up with national and international news. The sinking of the Titanic on April 5, 1912, horrified him as it did everyone else. He wrote,
Ship of doom, bark of death, the scatterer of weeping, was launched upon the billows, a thing of pride for all to see. With happy songs, shouts of joy, the people gave a greeting to this modern marvel as they gazed in wonder. Titanic, yours a name so proud, how magnificent is she, largest plowman of the oceans, queen of all the ships at sea. It glistened oh so brightly in light of evening sun, that giant in her departing, leaving darkening land behind. All were there without a care of human might depending. This was like a paradise upon the ocean's billows. Do slow down for heaven's sake, a shout comes from above. We have just received a word that the ice is on the move. Like a shadow speeds the ship, ripping through the waves, but the dread death angel is soon to claim her booty. The ship proceeds at swiftest pace, swiftly looms the crack of doom. There's a giant mound of ice as soon the ship it butchers. And so the giant's ribs are ruptured, ice has done its dirty work. What a racket, what a banging, people shouting everywhere. The threat of death filled every mind, a prayer is on many a lip. Death approaches with his side, for help is far, so far away. Captain Smith stands on the deck as noble as can be. He shouts commands here and there. Steadfast, firm is he. Ismay scrambles from his cabin. What is that he's shouting now? Why is our ship standing? Now we'll lose the race. But the danger he can see, his faint heart is frightened now. So into the first lifeboat this poor coward turns to flee.
Eelu saw firsthand the events of the Copper Country Strike of 1913 and the Italian Hall disaster, for he lived only 50 miles from the Calumet area. He wrote a lengthy poem about the events. Here are just a few excerpts.
Here in America we see much, strikes, cessation of work, and such. The Copper Country strike we just seen, its effects far and wide have been. The workers attempt to prove their lot. You can't always depend on the big shot. The laborers have been so trodden down, they've worked like mules underground. Now improvements they hope will be found. They've always depended upon their bosses. Profits they brought them, not losses. But little has it benefited the miners so poor, while the bosses enjoyed the gain so sure.
Then Eelu writes about the reaction of the public.
Great was the Copper Country's concern when about the strike they did learn. The turning of wheels is heard no more. Their picks the miners now ignore. The men have ascended up to land. The big bosses really become concerned when the whistle no longer is heard.
The big bosses would not lend an audience to the miners, and the strike continued, leading to that terrible tragedy on Christmas Eve.
How terrible was that Christmas Eve when people gathered at the Italian Hall to give a good Christmas to folks small. It was a joyful celebration until the deadly devastation. Lives were lost, almost 100. Was the devil's helper there, some wondered? Into the hall had crept some monster who shouted a cry of fire. This created such alarm and din that all was now panic within. All rushed to the door and stare, which turned out to be a snare. The panicked crowd created a dam. The path was blocked on this jam. Confusion reigned on every hand. The weakest ones were crushed to death. This was the most awful sight. Unimaginable was their plight. Many a mother descends on the scene to look for her child where she might have been. Into the heap she extends her hand. There is her own dear child. How can she stand the grief and sorrow that fills her heart? Not soon does she cover from that smart. Many now had a somber Christmas.
Eelu concluded regarding the strike.
The strike came to a bitter end. No one dreamed this is how it would end. Its duration was 8 months in all, and no benefit could anyone see at all. Instead, it caused much useless turmoil. But the many murders were worst of all. The condition of many was worse than before, and the wrath of the big shots was a roar. In taunting words they spoke to the men, and at work harassed them again and again. Others had to seek work elsewhere and suffer the effects of the strike over there.
Eelu never forgot Finland and expressed his yearnings in Finland, land of my birth.
I remember the land where I was born, the beauty of nature so fine. In my mind often for Finland I yearn, its summer so splendid, sublime. Sweet were the shores of the little brook as its current rippled and murmured, enraptured upon all you look, and your banks the roses enlightened. Although the land contains no gold nor silver in her coffers, still nature does a beauty hold, pleasure to her people offers. For Finland do I ever yearn, if only I could greet it once more. If perchance I should some day return, it would please me evermore.
Eelu and Geisa raised their family on the farm in Nisila. Geisa died on September 29, 1938. Eelu wrote a tribute to her.
Se Kaisa armas ja rakkahin mulla, näin eron hetki piti meillekin tulla. Olit maailmaan mun ilokseni luotu, vain sitä ei koko iäkseni suotu. Sinä päivätyösi niin uskolla täytit, sinun ahkeruusi aina vain näytit. Myös perheen äiti olit mitä parhain, tuli majan muutto sulle näin varhain. Nyt loppunut on kaikki vaivat nuo, olet päässyt kaivaton luojasi luo. Sinun kasvosi enää en minä näe, vain muistosi iäti rintaani jää.
And in translation,
Geisa, beloved, to me most precious, the time of parting has come for us. To be the joy of my life you were created, but for my whole life that was not granted. In your daily chores you were most faithful, of your responsibilities most mindful. Of mothers you were the very best. Too early you have moved to your heavenly rest. Now all your earthly sufferings are o'er. Your beloved face I shall see no more. You have moved to your heavenly Father's domain, but your memory in my heart will forever remain.
Eelu died on February 7, 1953, but his memory lives on in his poems, which have been preserved at the Finnish American Archives in Hancock, Michigan, as well as in translation in A Rascal's Craft, which can be ordered from Amazon or from the author.